Welcome everybody to Linux Academy. My name is Terry, and over this course we will be covering all things Linux, introduction to installation and setup. Okay, so now that we have gone through the installation process for Ubuntu once before, we're going to do it a second time. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to install Ubuntu along with Windows. Particularly on the desktop, that's the most common installation that you'll find, that you've already got Windows installed. Most people are already familiar with Windows, have been running Windows most of their professional or personal lives. And installing Ubuntu so that you don't mess up your Windows installation and that you can cleanly boot the two of them is something that we'll go through right now. So we have Windows, in this case a Windows virtual machine, but again a physical machine makes no difference. We've got two drives, one that already runs Windows and one, and in this case, that's blank. So I've got an 80 gig partition that is for Windows 7, and this is a hard disk. Again, it's virtual here, but it can be physical. So Windows 7 happens to be running on this virtual machine, and I've added a second hard disk, which in this case is completely empty. My CD-ROM is set to boot off of the Ubuntu 13.04 CD that we used during the last video for just installing plain Ubuntu. So we're going to go ahead and power it on. If you're doing it on a physical device that has a couple of hard drives, one running Windows, one that you intend for Linux, all you got to do is put in your live CD or your live USB key and hit the power button. You'll see exactly the same thing that we're going to see here. So this is a familiar screen for those of you who have already viewed the installation of Ubuntu. This is exactly the process that we started the last video with. Everything will look identical up to the point where in the last video we chose to try Linux first. We're going to go straight into the installation. During the last video we also accepted all the defaults, including all of the partitioning. In this case we're going to go through a little more detail so that we can add a little flexibility to our system and make sure that we don't inadvertently overwrite our Windows installation. So let's go ahead and install Ubuntu. We're going to go ahead and download updates and install third-party software just like we did last time. And here coming up is the portion that we'll go ahead and customize. We can replace Windows 7, but in this case that's not really what we want to do. We're going to do something else. So we've got a couple of different drives. We've got right here, device for bootloader installation, we've got two drives. We've got DevSDA and DevSDB. One happens to be 21 gig in size and there's nothing on it. One happens to be 80 gig in size and there's a single partition that's Windows 7. Currently that's where the bootloader is. A bootloader is simply where your computer looks to boot a system up. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and create a new partition table. Make sure that we are selecting the VMware Virtual 20 gig drive, not the one that is running Windows. So down here, device for bootloader installation is DevSDA. We've selected DevSDA up here. We're going to create a new partition table. And now we're going to go to free space again on DevSDA. We're going to hit plus. Let's just allocate the entire thing for Ubuntu. You can customize your partition so that you have multiple partitions with multiple drives if you want, but in this case we're just going to do a simple 20 gig installation of Ubuntu. Now here's where we're also going to go. We're going to go in here and we're going to change the Windows partition using this default, just so that you can see we can either not use the partition, we could format the partition, or we can leave it as NFS. We're not going to do any of those things. All we're going to do is we're just making sure that we're on Ubuntu. So we have the root mount, 21 gig, default file system type, and the bootloader is installing on DevSDA. That's all we're going to do. And then we're going to hit install now. It's asking about swap space there. We're not worried about swap space in this case. This is just an installation for Ubuntu and Windows to dual boot. We'll go ahead and leave the device alone, or the time zone alone. English is our language and keyboard, exactly like we did during the first video. Test user, test is our username, and we assign a nice weak password. We hit continue, and then we go ahead and let the installation finish. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here. Through the magic of video editing, it will just go to the end of the installation process. We'll be right back. And as promised, through the magic of editing, we are now booted up to our installed Ubuntu system. And as you'll see, when your system boots up when Ubuntu isn't the only operating system installed, as we saw before, we do have a Windows 7 installation. Now, we can choose to boot Ubuntu now, which is our default desktop installation, or we can go ahead and boot Windows 7. This keeps Ubuntu and Windows completely separate from each other. Although you can install them both on the same physical drive on separate partitions, it makes it easier if you have two physical drives, one for Ubuntu, one for Windows, even if that second physical drive is an external USB or FireWire drive. However, it is equally easy to set up in this case for the same physical drive on a separate partition. That's beyond the scope of this video because it does require resizing the Windows partition to make room for Ubuntu, but this shows you that we do have the ability to do either one. We boot into Windows, we can start Windows normally, and we're going to go ahead and pause this video so that we can get back to our start menu. So as we saw a moment ago, we can boot Windows, but we're going to go ahead and boot into Ubuntu and finish our installation for the desktop. And this will look exactly like it did during the last video. So getting Windows and Linux, Ubuntu, or any other version which would be a similar process to live on the same computer and dual boot on the same PC is equally easy on physical as well as virtual hardware. So from here, we're going to go to the desktop and start exploring our operating system for Ubuntu Linux and dual booting Windows. My name is Terry for Linux Academy, brought to you by Pinehead TV.